the young and the restless spoilers. A disgusting sight. Jack was the traitor, the despicable member of the Abbott family. The sight of Jack wrapped up in blankets with Patty was so repulsive, so horrifying, that the air seemed to grow heavy with disbelief. For a split second, no one spoke. Kyle had once been proud of his father, an ideal role model to emulate. What was he doing now? What they were witnessing wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation, a distorted scene none of them were prepared to face. Kyle wanted to punch his father, but was restrained. He lunged at Jack with the instinct of a son deeply betrayed. Years of admiration, respect, and complex love clashed with the harsh reality before him. Jack felt ashamed. He had never been in this situation. He had always been a model father. Billy reacted instantly, grabbing Kyle and holding him back, before the situation escalated into violence. Their standoff lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to show the Abbott family was on the verge of collapse. Patty was plotting something, and she was a devil in human form. Instead of shame or fear, there was something unsettling in her smile, a smile of satisfaction. It was the smile of someone who believed she had accomplished exactly what she came here to do. That smile alone made Diane feel nauseated. It wasn't the smile of a woman caught in a scandal. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment. Diane thought something through, and she instructed Billy to get Jack out. They needed to talk to Patty. There was calculation behind it, a strange calmness that showed she was never afraid of being discovered. Diane suddenly realized that Patty might not have come here for Jack at all. There was something deeper behind this moment, something orchestrated with cold precision. That realization stirred a different kind of anger within her. After Patty was tied to the chair, she screamed and demanded the police be called, but there was no one there. Diane said Patty might die if she didn't tell the truth. Diane turned to him with a sharp gaze that silenced him instantly. There was nothing left to say between them. Billy pushed Jack toward the door, making it clear he was no longer welcome in the room. For the first time in years, Jack Abbott found himself standing outside as an unwelcome stranger while the rest of his family remained inside. Billy and Kyle's murderous stares began to frighten Patty, who took Diane's slaps, causing her pain, and thought she needed to protect her life. The interrogation began slowly at first. Diane demanded to know why Patty was there and what she thought she was doing. Patty responded with evasiveness, half-hearted answers, avoiding the truth without even touching it. Each word only angered Diane further. The first slap came unexpectedly so hard it echoed throughout the room. Patty flinched and turned her head away, but instead of completely losing her composure, it only cracked her mask slightly. Kyle stepped closer, his voice trembling with anger as he demanded the truth. Patty tried to smile again, but this time it was a weaker laugh. Billy moved closer, pressing her more and more, forcing her to explain. The pressure increased. Another slap, then another. The questions became more frequent, louder, more desperate as Diane pushed Patty to her limits. For the first time, Patty began to show fear. Her confidence began to crumble under the relentless questioning. The room seemed to shrink with each passing second, the tension tightening like a noose around her. Diane's patience had completely run out. She grabbed Patty by the collar and demanded the truth one last time. The rage in Diane's eyes was undeniable. That's when Patty finally couldn't take it anymore. Her voice trembled as she began to speak each word, a jumbled mess, before finally revealing the truth that none of them had anticipated. She confessed that it wasn't her doing. She had been hired, paid, directed. The plan had been laid out to her step by step, meticulously designed to ensure Jack would be caught in the most humiliating way possible. And the man behind it all was Victor. That name rang out like thunder. For a moment, no one moved. Even Billy seemed stunned by the revelation. Victor Newman was always capable of devising cruel schemes, but orchestrating something this cruel crossed the darkest line. Patty continued to explain, breathless. Victor had approached her with an offer promising rewards and protection if she performed her role flawlessly. Her task was simple: lure Jack into an awkward situation and ensure that someone important would witness it. The heavy oak front door of the Abbott mansion clicked shut, but the sound echoed in Diane Jenkins' mind like a judge's gavel. She stood frozen in the opulent foyer, her manicured nails digging into the soft cashmere of her cardigan. Jack was gone. Again. And once again, the frantic, tearful voice on the other end of his phone had belonged to Nikki Newman. The air in the mansion, usually thick with the scent of fresh lilies and polished mahogany, suddenly felt suffocating. Diane walked slowly into the living room, her reflection catching in the ornate mirror above the fireplace. She saw a woman who had clawed her way back from the dead, who had endured the scorn of Genoa City, all to reclaim the love of Jack Abbott. Yet here she was, playing second fiddle to the perennial damsel in distress. Jack's savior complex, when it came to Nikki, was a festering wound in Diane's heart. He called it sponsorship. He called it friendship. Diane knew exactly what it was, a blatant disregard for his wife's feelings. The Abbott family made it no easier. Earlier that day, Ashley had offered one of her signature condescending smirks, and even Tracy had looked at Diane with that unbearable, pitying kindness. They still saw her as the interloper, the mistake Jack couldn't stop making. The betrayal burned hot in her chest, a toxic sludge of inadequacy and rage that demanded an outlet. Jack had chosen Nikki over her one too many times, leaving Diane to rot in the gilded cage of the Abbott estate. Across town, inside the sleek, glass-walled confines of his office, Billy Abbott was nursing a completely different kind of fury. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring down at the bustling streets of Genoa City, a crystal tumbler of bourbon sweating in his grip. The ice clinked against the glass, a sharp sound in the dead silence of the room. Jack had been missing for 2 days last week, unreachable off the grid. While the rest of the family had brushed it off as a spontaneous retreat or a business trip gone dark, Billy knew better. He could smell the sulfur. He could smell Victor Newman. The old feud over Chancellor had never truly died. It had only gone dormant. Victor had been making aggressive, shadowy moves in the corporate sector, trying to swallow up Chancellor assets through shell companies. Billy's paranoia, honed by years of being Victor's favorite punching bag, told him that Victor had temporarily abducted Jack to keep him out of a crucial board vote. The mustache was playing God again, moving the Abbotts around like pawns on his bespoke chessboard. Billy hurled his glass at the wall, the crystal-shattered amber liquid raining down the expensive wallpaper. "Not this time," Victor Billy whispered to the empty room, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "You don't get to touch my family and walk away." The desire for retaliation wasn't just a flicker. It was a roaring inferno. He was going to make Victor bleed, even if he had to tear down Genoa City to do it. The low, sultry jazz playing at Society did nothing to soothe Diane's frayed nerves. She sat at a corner booth cloaked in the shadows, nursing a dry martini. She was halfway through her second olive when a familiar, cynical voice broke her concentration. "Careful, Diane. Drink any more of that and you might start telling the truth." Diane looked up, her eyes narrowing at Billy Abbott. He slid into the booth across from her, uninvited, signaling the bartender for a refill. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, and his eyes burned with a manic energy she hadn't seen in him for years. "What do you want, Billy? I'm not in the mood for the usual Abbott family hazing," Diane snapped, turning her gaze back to the swirling liquid in her glass. "I'm not here to haze you," Billy said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I saw Jack rushing out of the athletic club earlier. Let me guess," Nikki called. The bat signal went up, and St. Jack flew to the rescue. Diane's silence was all the confirmation Billy needed. He chuckled a dark, humorless sound. "He leaves you in the dust, Diane. He leaves all of us in the dust when it comes to the Newmans. Specifically, when it comes to Victor's wife." "Don't pretend you care about my marriage, Billy," she shot back, though his words hit their mark with agonizing precision. "I don't," Billy admitted freely. "But I do care that Victor Newman is pulling the strings. I know Victor had Jack sidelined last week. I know he's trying to dismantle Chancellor. Victor thinks he's untouchable. He thinks he can kidnap my brother, use his wife to humiliate you, and we'll just sit here and take it." Diane's eyes widened slightly. "You think Victor kidnapped Jack?" "I know he did." Billy lied his conviction so absolute it became its own truth, and I am going to destroy him for it. But I need someone on the inside. Someone who knows how the Newmans operate. Someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. Diane stared at Billy. For years they had been bitter adversaries, but looking at him now, bathed in the dim light of the restaurant, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a mirror. They were both outcasts. They were both tired of being collateral damage in the eternal war between Victor and Jack. They had a common goal. "If we do this," Diane murmured, her voice laced with venom, "we don't just wound him. We take him down. By any means necessary." "At all costs," Billy agreed, raising his freshly delivered drink. They relocated to a secure suite at the Genoa City Athletic Club, locking the heavy mahogany door behind them. The room was sterile, devoid of the emotional baggage that cluttered their respective homes. Here, they were just two architects drafting a blueprint for ruin. Billy paced the floor, laying out financial documents, shell company records, and Newman Enterprises' recent acquisitions. "Victor's corporate fortress is too well guarded," Billy explained, pointing to a labyrinthine flowchart of subsidiaries. "Victoria and Nick have insulated him from direct SEC scrutiny. If we hit him in the boardroom, he'll just tie us up in litigation for a decade." Diane, sitting at the edge of the plush sofa, shook her head. "You don't defeat Victor Newman with spreadsheets, Billy. You defeat him with skeletons. He projects this image of the ruthless but honorable patriarch. We need to shatter that illusion. We need a scandal so deeply personal, so incredibly dark that his family turns on him and the board is forced to oust him." And where do we find a skeleton big enough to crush the mustache? Billy asked, leaning against the desk. Diane's lips curled into a slow, chilling smile. I heard a rumor. A ghost from the past just checked into a motel on the outskirts of town. Someone who has been obsessed with the Newmans and the Abbotts for decades. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried because she helped dig the graves. Billy's brow furrowed. Who? Patty Williams. The Starlight Motel was a decaying relic on Highway 12, a place where the neon sign buzzed incessantly, missing 3 of its letters. Billy and Diane stood outside room 104, the crisp night air biting at their designer coats. The irony of the situation was not lost on Billy. You want to team up with the woman who shot Victor, terrorized my family, and literally murdered you, Billy whispered harshly. I faked my death, Billy. Patty just provided the canvas, Diane replied coldly. She spent years institutionalized, and during that time Victor visited her. He used her. He manipulated her fragile state to attack his enemies. She kept diaries. She kept proof. Diane knocked on the peeling green paint of the door. A moment later it creaked open, secured by a rusted chain. A pair of wide, erratic eyes peered out from the darkness. Hello, Patty, Diane said softly. The door closed, the chain rattled, and it opened wide. Patty Williams stood there, her hair graying but her eyes burning with that familiar, terrifying intensity. She was clutching a stuffed cat to her chest. Diane Patty whispered, a childlike smile spreading across her face. You look good for a dead girl. Inside the room, the walls were covered in frantic charcoal sketches of Victor Newman's face, his eyes hollowed out, his mustache exaggerated into devilish horns. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and dried lavender. We need your help, Patty, Billy said, stepping cautiously into the room. We want to bring Victor down, permanently. Patty's smile vanished. She walked over to a battered suitcase on the bed, her fingers trembling as she unzipped it. He promised to protect me, she muttered, her voice oscillating between a whisper and a shriek. He told me if I did what he asked, he would make the bad voices go away. But he was the bad voice. He made me do terrible things. He paid off the doctors. He funneled money through Chancellor to keep me hidden. She pulled out a thick leather-bound ledger and a stack of microcassette tapes. I kept it all, Patty said, her eyes welling with tears. Every visit, every wire transfer. Every time he ordered me to hurt someone to protect his precious Newman empire. Diane took the ledger, her eyes scanning the pages. The entries were chaotic, written in Patty's frantic scrawl, but the attached bank receipts and transcribed audio logs were undeniable. It was a goldmine of extortion, bribery, and psychological torture orchestrated by Victor Newman. This is it, Diane breathed, looking at Billy. This is the kill shot. 3 days later, the bomb detonated. It didn't start with a whisper. It started with a synchronized, deafening roar across every media outlet in the state. The Times Genoa City Chronicle, ***, GC Buzz Times, and National Financial Networks simultaneously received an anonymous encrypted data dump. The headlines were apocalyptic for the Newman Empire. ***, Victor Newman, exposed decades of blackmail, bribery, and manipulation of the mentally ill. The articles detailed Victor's secret visits to Patty Williams, proving he had weaponized a psychiatric patient to attack his corporate rivals. It showed a paper trail of millions of dollars, funneled illegally through Chancellor Winter's accounts to pay off corrupt doctors and silence witnesses. In the towering glass citadel of Newman Enterprises, chaos reigned. Phones rang incessantly, a cacophony of panic. Victoria Newman stood in the CEO's office, her face pale as a ghost, staring at the television screen as the stock price of Newman plummeted in real time. This can't be happening, she whispered, her hands shaking. Nick stormed into the room, his fists clenched, demanding answers she didn't have. Even Adam, usually the architect of such chaos, looked visibly stunned by the sheer magnitude of the exposure. The business world was in shock. Investors pulled out by the hour. Board members called emergency meetings. The invincible Victor Newman, the titan of industry, was suddenly bleeding in the water, surrounded by sharks. But a secret that massive leaves a trail, and Jack Abbott had the resources to follow it. The atmosphere in the Abbott mansion was suffocating when Diane returned that evening. The lights were dim, but Jack was waiting in the living room, his face a mask of absolute terrifying calm. Beside him stood Kyle, his arms crossed, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. Hello, darling, Diane said, forcing a smile, though. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Don't, Jack said, his voice slicing through the air like a razor. He tossed a thick manila folder onto the coffee table. Don't lie to me, Diane. Not today. Diane looked at the folder. It bore the logo of Jack's private security firm. They traced the IP address of the data dump Kyle spat, stepping forward. It came from a server paid for by a shell company. A shell company funded by an offshore account that you and Uncle Billy set up. Jack, let me explain. Explain what Jack roared, losing his composure, his face flushing dark red. That you aligned yourself with Billy, that the two of you tracked down Patty Williams, Diane, the woman who shot Victor, the woman who nearly destroyed this family time and time again. She had the proof, Diane yelled back, the resentment she had harbored for weeks finally boiling over. Victor has been torturing us for years. He kidnapped you. He uses Nikki as a weapon to keep you on a leash, and you just let him. Someone had to stop him. Kidnapped me? Jack looked genuinely baffled. Victor didn't kidnap me, Diane. I was at a secluded rehab facility upstate helping Nikki through a severe relapse. I couldn't have my phone. I told Billy that this morning. Diane felt the blood drain from her face. Billy had lied. Or Billy had been so blinded by his paranoia that he had invented a reality to justify his war. You brought a psychopath back into our lives, Kyle said, his voice trembling with betrayal. You risked the safety of my son, Harrison. You risked Jabot. You dragged us into the mud just to satisfy your own petty jealousy over Nikki. It wasn't just jealousy. Kyle, Diane pleaded, tears pricking her eyes. I did this for us. For our family. You did this for yourself, Jack said, his voice dropping to a hollow, devastating whisper. Pack your bags, Diane. I don't want you in this house tonight. The rift was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Abbott family, which Jack had fought so hard to unite, was shattered, torn apart by Diane's blinding resentment and Billy's unchecked paranoia. At the Newman Ranch, the storm was not just brewing, it had made landfall. Victor Newman stood by the massive stone fireplace, staring into the roaring flames. The fire illuminated the harsh, unyielding lines of his face. He was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who exacted vengeance. His lawyer, Michael Baldwin, and his head of security stood silently behind him, waiting for orders. Billy Abbott and Diane Jenkins. Victor said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute obedience. They think they can use a deranged woman to destroy my legacy. They think they can strike the king and live to tell the tale. They are sorely mistaken. You got that. Yes, Victor, Michael said cautiously, but the SEC is already knocking. We need a defensive strategy. Victor turned around, his eyes cold and devoid of any human mercy. Our defense is a scorched earth offense. Freeze them out. Every bank account, every credit card, every trust fund. Use our contacts at the SEC to launch a federal investigation into Billy's handling of Chancellor. Frame him for embezzlement if you have to. I want him ruined. And Diane? Find the gaps in her story from when she faked her death. Bribe the right officials. I want a warrant for her arrest for fraud and tax evasion by tomorrow morning. As for Patty Williams, find her. And make sure she never speaks to the press again. Within 24 hours, Victor's counterattack hit with the force of a hurricane. Billy walked into Chancellor Winters only to be escorted out by federal agents in handcuffs, his reputation in tatters, his assets seized. Diane found herself locked out of her own bank accounts, her credit cards declined at the GCAC, her face splashed across the tabloids as a fugitive fraudster. Victor's invisible hand squeezed their throats, cutting off their air supply with ruthless efficiency. They were pushed to the absolute brink, stripped of their wealth, their families, and their safety. The rain poured down on Genoa City, washing the streets in a cold, unforgiving gray. Diane and Billy sat in the dimly lit, damp basement of an abandoned warehouse on the south side of town. It was the only place Victor's men hadn't found them yet. Billy's knuckles were bruised and bloody from punching a concrete pillar. He paced the floor like a caged animal. He set me up, Billy muttered, his eyes wild. He planted the embezzlement evidence. The feds are going to put me away for 20 years. Diane sat on a wooden crate shivering. Her designer clothes ruined her life in ashes. She had lost Jack. She had lost Kyle. And now she was about to lose her freedom. The crushing weight of her choices pressed down on her chest. We pushed him into a corner, Diane whispered, staring blankly at the cold floor. And now he's going to slaughter us. No, Billy stopped pacing, turning to her with a look of pure, unadulterated madness. The moral boundaries that had once tethered him to sanity were completely obliterated. We don't just roll over and die. If Victor wants to play God, we show him what it looks like when heaven falls. What are you saying, Billy? Diane asked, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I'm saying we stop playing by the rules. No more press leaks. No more legal maneuvers, Billy said, walking over to a duffel bag he had stashed in the corner. He unzipped it, revealing a sleek, black, unregistered handgun. Victor took my family. He took your husband. He's taking our lives. Diane stared at the weapon, the gravity of the situation crashing down on her. The line between right and wrong had been erased, replaced by a desperate primal need to survive. The tension in the damp room was suffocating, a ticking time bomb of their own creation. They had sought to exploit Victor Newman's weaknesses, but in doing so they had unleashed a monster and become monsters themselves. The fates of the Abbotts and the Newmans now hung by a frayed, bloody thread, ready to snap at any moment, promising a war that would leave no survivors.